Okay, so here's a question that gets right to the heart of it. What really allowed some civilizations, like in Europe, to expand and conquer when others just didn't?
That's the big one, isn't it? It
Yeah.
goes way beyond just who had the best generals or the smartest inventors.
Exactly. I was thinking about that example of the Maori, and the Moriori basically neighbors,
Yeah.
but geography, the resources they had, it led to such different outcomes, really shows how much the environment shapes things.
It absolutely does. It sets the stage for everything else.
So today we're doing a deep dive into that foundation, the agricultural roots of civilization. We're pulling insights mainly from guns, germs, and steel, specifically part two, which is all about food production.
Where it all began, essentially.
Right. And our mission for you listening is to try and unpack how this basic thing, growing food, became, well, the bedrock for societies, even empires.
Yeah.
We're going to look at some, frankly, surprising stuff, like how the actual shape of a continent could influence agriculture's spread.
That's always a mind bender.
Totally. And the huge differences it made, whether you were farming or living nomadically, population, society, the works.
Yeah, differences there.
And then how we actually domesticated plants. There are these two ways, one almost accidental, the other very deliberate. We'll get into examples.
Their conscious and unconscious selection, yeah.
And finally, maybe touch on why some plants that seem promising, like acorns, just never really got domesticated in the same way.
The acorn question. It's a good one. But fundamentally, it all comes back to energy, doesn't it? Every living thing needs fuel. For us, that's food.
Simple as that.
And figuring out how we went from just finding food, hunting and gathering, to actually producing it. Well, that's the key. It unlocks why history unfolded so differently in different parts of the world. It really does set the stage.
Okay, let's jump into that first surprising factor then. The shape of the land. I mean, honestly, before digging into this source, I'd never really thought about how a continent being wide versus tall could matter so much.
It seems counterintuitive at first, maybe.
Yeah. So the source points out Europe and Eurasia, it's mostly wide, right? Stretches east to west, if you picture it.
Exactly. And the implication of that east-west axis is huge. It means large parts of Eurasia are at similar latitudes.
Ah, so similar climate.
Pretty much. Similar day length, similar growing seasons, similar temperature ranges, generally speaking.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Which made it, relatively speaking, much easier for crops that were domesticated in one area, say the Fertile Crescent, to spread east and west.
Because the conditions were similar enough for them to thrive.
Precisely. Wheat, barley, lentils. Even domesticated animals like cattle or sheep. They could move across Eurasia without hitting drastic climate barriers. A farming technique developed here could work over there.
Right. But then you look at, say, the Americas or Africa, they're oriented the other way, long and narrow, mostly north-south.
And that changes everything.
How so? What's the big difference that orientation makes?
Well, think about traveling north or south. You cross wildly different climate zones much faster.
Yeah, tropics to temperate zones, deserts.
Exactly. So a crop like maize, domesticated in Mesoamerica, faced huge challenges spreading north or south because the climate, the day length, everything changes so dramatically. It required significant adaptation, which takes time, or it just couldn't make the jump easily.
So it really slowed down the spread of agriculture.
Massively slowed it down.
Yeah.
Same for animals. Llamas domesticated in the Andes weren't going to thrive in Central America. That geographical barrier hindered the diffusion of agricultural packages, and with it, the potential for larger populations and complex societies to develop as quickly or spread as widely as they did in Eurasia.
Wow. It's kind of humbling, isn't it? Just the shape of where you happen to live could have such enormous consequences.
It really is. Factors completely outside human control setting these huge historical trajectories.
Okay, so let's pivot to the people themselves, the difference between those agricultural societies and the nomadic ones. This part was really eye-opening for me. The source mentions this huge demographic difference. Farmers could settle down, right? Consistent food.
Consistent food surplus, ideally.
Right. And because of that, they could have kids much closer together, like maybe every 2 years.
Yeah, that's the estimate. Settled life, enough food to wean earlier. It allows for shorter birth spacing.
But then you contrast that with nomadic hunter-gatherers.
Completely different situation. Nomadic mothers are on the move constantly. They're carrying everything, tools, shelter components, and their young children.
That's incredibly demanding.
Extremely. So they simply couldn't manage multiple very young children at once. Logistics are just too hard.
So what did they do?
Well, they employed various strategies to space out births. Things like prolonged breastfeeding, which can suppress fertility, sexual abstinence, sometimes abortion, and unfortunately even infanticide in some harsh circumstances. The goal was typically a minimum gap of, say, 4 years between surviving children.
4 years versus 2 years. Over generations.
The difference in population growth potential is just monumental. Agricultural societies could simply grow much, much faster. It created this enormous numbers advantage over time.
So it wasn't just about having more food, it was about having more people, too. But what did that food surplus actually do for the structure of these societies, beyond just feeding more mouths?
Ah, well, that's where things get really transformative. When not everyone has to spend all their time finding or growing food, it frees people up.
Frees them up for...
For other things, specialization becomes possible. You can have people who focus solely on being soldiers because you need to protect that stored food surplus.
Right, makes sense.
You can have full-time leaders or politicians emerge to organize the larger settled communities. You get craftspeople, potters, weavers, metalworkers. You get priests to manage the religious side of life, which often became more complex too.
So the whole structure of society changes.
Completely. It allows for and almost requires more complex political units. You go from maybe small bands or tribes to chiefdoms, then states, eventually even empires. It fuels technological innovation because you have specialists working on problems. And crucially, managing all this, the land, the food stores, the people, the trade, often leads to the development of writing.
To keep track of it all.
Exactly. Record-keeping administration. So that agricultural surplus wasn't just about food. It was the engine driving social complexity, political organization, technological advancement, pretty much everything we associate with civilization. The gap between agriculturalists and nomads just kept widening.
Okay, so we've got these farmers, growing populations, complex societies. But how did they get the crops in the first place? It wasn't like someone just found modern wheat growing wild, right? The source talks about two paths, unconscious and conscious domestication. Let's start with unconscious. What does that even mean? Sounds like an accident.
In many ways, it often was, or at least not deliberately planned for the long term. Think about it simply. Humans, or even animals, eat fruits or seeds they like.
Okay.
Later, their waste deposits those seeds, often in fertile areas like refuse piles near where people are living or camping.
Like unintentional planting.
Exactly. Or maybe people gathered wild plants, brought them back to camp and dropped some seeds, or intentionally threw out the seeds from the tastiest fruits right near their shelters.
So the plants they liked started growing nearby, conveniently.
Right. Humans, without necessarily thinking, I'm going to breed a better plant, started favoring certain plants just by eating them and discarding their seeds close by. The plants that tasted better, or were easier to gather, or grew well near human habitats, inadvertently got a reproductive advantage because of human behavior. We became part of their dispersal strategy, unintentionally selecting for traits useful to us.
Huh, that makes sense. Sort of like coevolution almost.
Kind of, yeah. An unconscious partnership to begin with.
So how did that shift into conscious, deliberate domestication, the kind we picture when we think of farming? What changed?
Well, at some point, people started noticing why some plants were better than others, and crucially, they realized that seeds from those better plants tended to produce more better plants.
They made the connection, like father, like son, or like parent plant, like offspring plant.
Exactly. And they started actively selecting and planting seeds only from the plants with the desirable traits. This is where conscious selection really kicks in.
Okay, give us an example.
Wild almonds are a classic one. Most wild almonds are actually quite bitter and toxic. They contain amygdalin, which releases cyanide.
Not something you want to snack on.
Definitely not. But occasionally, a natural mutation occurs in a wild almond tree that makes its nuts non-bitter and non-toxic. Maybe some ancient human, or perhaps even an animal first, discovered one of these rare, safe trees.
Lucky find.
Very lucky. And if humans then gathered nuts only from that non-toxic tree and planted them, maybe near their settlement,
They'd get more non-toxic trees.
over time, yes. By consistently selecting for that single gene mutation, non-bitterness, humans essentially created the sweet, edible almond we know today. They consciously transformed it.
Wow, and this happened with other plants too, ones that were maybe bitter or less useful originally.
Oh, absolutely. Potatoes, many gourds like watermelon, even things like cabbage and its relatives. Their wild ancestors were often much more bitter, smaller, or even mildly toxic. It took generations of farmers noticing beneficial mutations and consciously selecting for them bigger fruits, less bitterness, easier harvesting to create the crops we rely on.
And it wasn't always just about eating the main part of the plant either, was it? The source mentions secondary products?
Right. That's another layer of conscious selection. Think about olives or sesame. People didn't just cultivate them to eat the fruit or seed directly, initially at least.
It was for the oil.
Exactly. They selected for plants that produced lots of oil. Or consider cotton or flax. They were domesticated and selected specifically for their fibers for making textiles. So humans were consciously choosing plants not just for basic calories, but for these incredibly valuable secondary resources too.
This really highlights how observant and, frankly, ingenious early people were. Which brings us to that amazing example from Korea, the Sorori rice seeds. 13,000 years old. That's staggering.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it provides such concrete evidence of this conscious domestication process very early on.
So what's the key difference with the Sorori rice? How do we know it was cultivated, not just wild?
The main issue with wild rice, from a human perspective, is shattering.
Shattering.
Yeah, when the grains ripen, the connection to the stalk becomes brittle,
Uh,
and the grains naturally fall off, they shatter, dispersing the seeds, which is great for the wild plant's reproduction.
but terrible if you're trying to harvest it efficiently. You'd lose most of the grain.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But cultivated rice varieties have a genetic mutation, often just a single gene change again, that prevents this shattering. The grains stay firmly attached to the stem, even when ripe,
Making harvest possible.
making it much, much easier. Now, the sorority seeds show evidence of this non-shattering trait, but even more compellingly, they found evidence on the seeds themselves. There's a tiny part called the sujigiyong, the little stem or pedicel attaching the grain. On the sorority seeds, it shows clear marks of being artificially cut, not naturally broken off like shattering wild rice would be.
Someone sliced it off the stalk.
That's the interpretation. It strongly suggests deliberate harvesting by humans. And they didn't just find seeds.
Right, there's a tool too.
Exactly. Nearby, they found a stone tool called a homnol yanmo, which has grooves, and analysis showed plant fibers, specifically rice phytoliths, embedded on its sharp edge.
Proof it was used for cutting the rice.
It's very strong evidence. So you have ancient rice grains that don't shatter easily, show cut marks, found alongside a tool likely used for harvesting them. It paints a clear picture of conscious selection and cultivation way back then.
13,000 years ago. That just blows my mind. So, okay, humans were clearly capable of incredible feats of observation and selective breeding. Which leads back to that question, why didn't all promising plants get domesticated? Why not acorns, for instance? People clearly ate them. You mentioned acorn jelly, muck, still exists, squirrels plant them everywhere.
Ah, yes, squirrels are excellent oak planters. But from a human farmer's perspective, acorns presented some major hurdles that things like wheat or peas or almonds didn't.
Okay.
Well, first off, think about the time scale. How long does it take an oak tree to grow from an acorn before it starts producing acorns itself?
Oh, wow. Years, right? A long time.
Easily 10 years, maybe longer, for a significant crop. Imagine being an early farmer. You plant your field of acorns, and then you wait a decade for the first real harvest.
That's not practical compared to planting wheat and getting a harvest the same year. Patience is one thing, but a decade.
It requires a very different kind of planning and societal stability, maybe
That's wrong.
spanning generations, which might not have been feasible. That long generation time makes selective breeding incredibly slow.
Okay, that's a big one. Anything else?
Yes, the genetics of bitterness. We talked about almonds, where non-bitterness was often controlled by a single gene. Find the non-bitter one, plant its seeds, and you're likely to get more non-bitter ones. Easy selection.
But acorns aren't like that.
Apparently not. The source suggests that bitterness in acorns is controlled by multiple genes.
Making it more complicated.
Much more complicated. Even if you find a less bitter acorn and plant it, its offspring might inherit a mix of genes that makes them bitter again. It's much harder to consistently select for non-bitterness when multiple genes are involved. You can't easily fix the trait through simple selection like you could with almonds.
So, the long growth cycle and the complex genetics of bitterness basically made acorns a poor candidate for domestication despite being edible after processing.
That seems to be the conclusion. Humans essentially gave up on trying to breed better acorns and instead focused on developing a processing technology, leaching out the tannins, the bitter compounds, with water to make them edible as muck. It's a clever workaround, but it's processing, not domestication.
Fascinating. So it wasn't just about potential food value, it was about the plant's biology and genetics lining up favorably for human manipulation.
Exactly. So when you pull it all together, you see how these intricate processes, the accidental beginnings, the conscious selection, the genetic luck of the draw with certain plants, even the geography, they all profoundly shaped human history. population sizes, social structures, technology. It all ties back to how we manage to produce our food.
And those seemingly small details, like a continence axis or how many genes control bitterness in a nut, they ended up having these just massive knock-on effects over millennia.
Monumental consequences, really. It determined who had the surplus, who developed the technologies, who built the empires in many ways.
It really reframes how you look at history, moving beyond just battles and kings to these deep environmental and biological roots.
Mhm.
Incredible stuff. We've really only just scratched the surface here talking about plants. The sheer luck involved sometimes,
Mm.
the incredible patience required, the way selective pressures worked,
Mm.
and the huge impact it all had.
Yeah, the plant story is fundamental.
So, thinking ahead, what happens when we shift focus, when we turn from the plant kingdom to the animal kingdom? What kind of new challenges, maybe new opportunities, do you think humans ran into when they started trying to domesticate animals? How might that have added another layer, another twist to the course of history?